I saw the gun before I heard the scream, and by the time my mind caught up to what was happening, my 13-year-old niece was already collapsing beside the memorial fountain named after her mother. If you've never watched a child fall like that, quiet, almost graceful, like the world itself refused to accept the violence, then count yourself lucky. I still hear the echo of that single shot every time the wind hits the stone just right. My name is Corwin Terrell, federal appellate judge, 43 years old, a man who has seen every kind of cruelty you can write into a legal brief, but nothing prepared me for the day. The president of my HOA pulled a trigger on a barefoot girl holding a sketchbook. Thalia, that was her name. She drew birds' fountains, shadows, anything that didn't talk back or demand she perform normalcy. She was neurodivergent, quiet, gentle. She lived with me after her mother, my sister, died due to hospital negligence. I took her in with one promise: no one would ever make her feel out of place again. I really thought I could keep that promise. Until Brindle Hollow happened. Until Mara Vexley happened. You want to know where all this started? Not with a gun, not with shouting. It started with chalk. A soft pastel drawing of two koi fish she made on the sidewalk outside our house. Harmless. Beautiful even. But a week later I came home to a bright orange citation taped to my door: unapproved outdoor markings. Please remove immediately. I remember reading it twice, thinking it had to be a mistake. I scraped the chalk off anyway, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to give the HOA any ammunition. Then came the next citation. Then another. Sitting on the fountain ledge, inappropriate contact with memorial property. Wearing a bright yellow jacket, visual disruption. Standing too quietly for too long. Unsupervised minor loitering. Every line read like someone was inventing offenses just to see how far they could push me before I snapped. And at the center of it all was Mara. Perfect posture, perfect lipstick, perfect smile that never once reached her eyes. She ran the HOA like it was a miniature kingdom, and everyone else lived at the mercy of her interpretation of order. I explained Thalia's condition. I provided documentation. I cited ADA protections. But every time Mara tilted her head, gave this soft, condescending smile and said, "We all have to follow the community standards, Judge Terrell." I should have known then. The escalation wasn't loud. It was quiet, subtle death by paperwork. New cameras appeared near the fountain without any resident vote. Motions passed without quorum. Citations written so fast, I wondered if Mara slept with a stack of blank forms on her nightstand. And yet I kept trying to be reasonable. I kept telling myself I could handle this the professional way, through channels, through dialogue, through the law. But on the morning of the shooting, reason didn't matter. I was 20 yards away when I saw Mara standing rigid, arm outstretched, pistol aimed directly at Thalia. The sunlight glinted off the barrel like it was something sacred. "You're trespassing," she screamed. "One more step and I will defend myself." Thalia didn't move. She was wearing earbuds. She probably didn't even hear her. She was just drawing, barefoot on the warm stone, completely harmless. I ran. I yelled. I saw Mara's finger tighten, and then I heard the sharp mechanical pop that shattered the last piece of my family. I hit the ground beside Thalia before the neighbors even gasped. Her sketchbook slid out of her hand, pages fanning open like wings. There was still a pulse, thin, fading, but a pulse. I held her wrist like I could anchor her there. The police took their time arriving. When they did, they treated Mara like she'd witnessed a crime, not committed one. She wasn't handcuffed. She wasn't disarmed. They let her rephrase her statement 3 times until it sounded polished enough to pass as self-defense. 12 hours later, she was home behind her HOA security gate as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, 4 minutes after the ambulance left with my niece's body, Brindle Hollow issued me a citation. Emergency vehicles caused landscaping disruption. That was the moment a cold, unfamiliar feeling settled into my chest. Not rage, not grief. Something in between, a hollow space where both rattled around, scraping against each other. I didn't cry. Couldn't. Everything inside me felt suspended, waiting for something to break. Then came the HOA-wide email. Subject line: incident clarification and temporary safety reminder. Thalia was described as a juvenile resident violating community structure guidelines. Not a girl. not a niece, not a human being with a name, just a violation. There are moments in your life where you can feel yourself split in half. One side still clings to the world as you believed it worked. The other side sees the truth ugly and sharp. That email cut straight through me. I started digging. Through bylaws I had helped draft years ago, through voting records, through archived HOA documents no one else bothered to look at. I knew Mara had crossed lines, but I didn't realize how many she had buried the evidence under. The cameras around the fountain, installed illegally. The behavioral citations, fabricated into a pattern. The amendments she used to justify surveillance, passed without the required 60% resident vote. She hadn't just targeted Thalia, she'd engineered a narrative to justify targeting her. Still, there was a part of me that thought, what if I'm overreacting? What if grief is twisting everything? What if I should just let it go? I hate admitting that. I hate admitting that for a moment I doubted myself. I'd spent my career believing in systems, believing in law, believing in process. And now the system had failed me so spectacularly that I didn't know whether to fight or collapse. Then came the flash drive, left anonymously at my door. No note, just a folded napkin wrapped around cold metal. I drove to a public library at midnight and plugged it in there, not at home. My instincts were screaming not to trust anything on my network. There were 6 clips. The first was shaky footage of Mara at the trailhead near the fountain saying, "She's like a weed. She won't stop unless you pull the roots." The second was security footage of Mara handing a black case to a private contractor 2 days before the shooting. But the third clip, her voice, clear as a bell. "If a child makes this place feel less secure, then the child is the problem, not the rules." That was the moment my doubt evaporated. I knew exactly who sent the drive and why. Damon Creel, the quiet vice president, the man who seconded every one of Mara's motions, the man who stayed silent in meetings, the man who now realized silence had consequences. He texted me the next morning. "I have the meeting logs, the private ones. We need to talk." What he gave me wasn't gossip. It was a blueprint of the rot in Brindle Hollow. Mara's private drafts, audio from off-record Zoom sessions, her comments on proposed amendments. "Use this if optics allow. Good to frame after an incident. She poisons the image. Clear her if you have to." Clear her, meaning my niece, a child. I assembled everything, citations, videos, timestamps, transcripts, and I sent it to the only people who could turn evidence into pressure, the press. And the press delivered. Within 72 hours, the HOA that killed a child in the name of order was national news. Clips of Mara calling Thalia a pest played on morning shows. Disability rights organizations mobilized. The state attorney general announced a formal investigation. And the residents, well, residents who once stayed quiet, finally woke up. They came to me with their own stories, their own citations, their own fear. I showed them the clause in their membership agreement about voting out the board with 10% signatures. I collected 33 signatures in a single afternoon. When Mara finally showed her face at the emergency HOA meeting, she sweated through her blazer. She tried to regain control with a polished speech about misinformation and tragic misunderstandings. I stood up and played the audio, "She's not ours. Her blood isn't in this neighborhood's roots." The crowd erupted, not screaming, but something worse, a low, angry rumble of betrayal. Damon stood beside me and said, "We let her do it. We looked away. That ends now." That was the final crack. The next morning, state officials walked into the HOA boardroom with badges and authority I recognized well. They suspended every HOA activity, seized records, froze accounts, and initiated a full audit. By the time Mara was arrested, she looked like a woman trapped in a story she no longer controlled. And in court, when the verdict came down guilty on all counts, life without parole, she didn't say a word. She didn't have anything left to say. The board collapsed. The HOA was dismantled under state supervision, and the fountain, the place where Thalia drew her last picture, was renamed by the city council, Thalia's Grove, for every voice that was silenced. I didn't smile, I didn't cheer, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt steady, like the world had tilted back into place by a single degree. And if you take anything from this story, let it be this: silence isn't peace, and rules aren't justice. Only ordinary people who refuse to look away can decide which one wins.